Hey everyone, this video is for people who are developing their own course. So if you have a course you're developing right now, you might have an idea of the topic, or you might think, you might know the activities that you want students to do, but you haven't put it all together in a package yet, and you're not really sure kind of how to do that. So if that's your problem, give me 10 minutes and I'm going to try to get you on the right track here. Every course requires three things. You need learning goals, which is those are the things that students are going to learn in your class, unsurprisingly. You need learning activities, which is how you're spending class time. So that's what the students are doing, and including kind of what they're doing at home, homework, or other things that they do outside of class. But it's what the students do during the course. And finally, you need learning assessments. Now, learning assessments are how you know whether the students are reaching those learning goals that you set out. And all three of these pieces need to work together to make an effective course, a course where students are actually learning something. So let's start with the first one. So learning goals, you kind of need to start out with learning goals, but you're kind of creating all three of these simultaneously. Now, with learning goals, you want to create specific, measurable learning goals. And some people, maybe if they start out with a topic, they know kind of what they're going to teach. Yeah, I'm going to teach algebra. But algebra is not a learning goal yet. So you think about, well, what are the pieces that make up this topic? So when I think about algebra, I think about single variable equations and systems of linear equations and, point slope formula and these things. I'm reaching way back. But even these are not yet learning goals. So just saying, well, I'm going to teach students about solving single variable equations, that's not specific enough yet. You want to think about the contexts that you want students to be comfortable with. So are students going to be able to, are they going to be able to read a word problem and then, know that they need to create a single variable equation out of this and solve that equation to solve the problem? That's a more complex level of understanding than just seeing the algebraic representation and knowing that I got to take 3 from both sides and divide by 2, and I get that x equals, 5. So you kind of iteratively drill down from the broad to kind of the more specific. Other people start with activities. They know they want students to do something during the class. So it's like, yay, we're going to have students build robots. And that's great, but building robots, that's not a learning goal. So you want to take the activities, if this is your problem or your situation, you want to take the activities that you want to do and you want to think about, well, what are those activities furthering for the students? Like, what kinds of goals are they leading towards? So for building a robot, it might not, maybe the goal is not to have these students be expert robot builders, but the goal is to maybe teach them about planning and testing and iteration. Maybe it's about collaboration, like collaborating with other people. Maybe it's about kind of fulfilling multiple constraints and kind of a multiple constraint problem, this kind of thing. So you need to kind of take a step back from the activity and think about, well, what pieces of the activity are going to be important, and what are those pieces leading towards? And depending on which goals you choose, you're going to frame that activity a little bit differently, and you might stop at different points and have different kind of direct instruction pieces to it. There are 2 other tips that I think are important when you're creating these measurable, specific learning goals. First is to think about where your students start and where they're going. So your course fits into a student's learning trajectory in some way. So they bring in certain skills, knowledge, experiences with them, and you want to try to leverage that, those experiences. And then, after your course, they're going to do something else, right? They're going to go on to a career of doing something. They're going to go on to the next advanced course. And so what are they going to need for the future? And this process of thinking from the student's perspective is going to help you eliminate certain goals that are just extraneous or just unneeded, that are just kind of, vestigial tales hanging out there. The third thing, or second, third, whatever, a piece of advice about creating learning goals is to frame every learning goal into the following phrase. Students should be able to do something. They should be able to X, Y, and Z thing. They should be able to solve single variable equations when presented in an algebraic form. They should be able to perceive when an equation is needed in a word problem and create that equation for single variable problems. They should be able to write a 3 to 4 paragraph persuasive essay, this kind of thing. And so what this does is it helps frame your goals in a way that focuses on the skill that you're teaching, which is what you want the goals to do. So on to number 2, learning activities. Learning activities are the engines that drive learning forward. And so you want every activity to have a purpose. So you want to link your activities as you develop them to your learning goals. So if you're ever in a situation where you're in the class and you don't know why the students are doing what they're doing, and they don't know why they're doing what they're doing, that's a real problem. Everyone should have an understanding of that this activity is leading towards something important. And different kinds of goals require different kinds of learning activities. So for example, if you're teaching persuasive writing, you're not going to have students do flashcard games. The goal and the activity, they're just kind of orthogonal to each other. They just don't match. If you're teaching persuasive writing, obviously you're going to have students write, or I hope you will, because they need practice at this skill. But you also might consider other activities. It's not just writing all the time. They might be reading persuasive essays to understand certain strategies or structures in these essays. They might be doing kind of debates to maybe understand an issue more deeply. You might give them graphic organizers to structure their arguments to help them write a little bit better than they otherwise would have. You might do some kind of peer editing. So there's lots of different activities that could be done to kind of pursue the same learning goals. Okay. Number 3 is learning assessments. Learning assessments, when we think about learning assessments, a lot of people think tests. We got to get them the tests. We have to have a test at the end of every unit. We have to have a test at the end of every semester, what have you. But assessments really include a lot of different things, include anything that tells you something about how the student is doing and what they're learning. So it could be tests, it could be quizzes, it could be homework assignments, it could be presentations and papers and collaborative problem solving, anything where you get some information about the students and how they're doing. You want every learning goal to have an assessment. So at least one assessment for every goal. Now, sometimes assessments, you might be assessing lots of goals at once with a single test or a single assessment or a single paper, right? You're looking and you're saying, well, have they structured the argument correctly if it's a persuasive writing thing? Have they structured the argument correctly? Did they identify certain rebuttals to their argument and deal with those, etc.? So you can have more goals than assessments, but every goal has to have at least one assessment. Okay. I hope that's clear. The other thing here is that you want to focus your assessments on what they reveal about student progress. So you want assessments to be revealing. You want it to show you the things that students misunderstand, or maybe the skill gaps that they have. This is really important because if you get a test back from a student, if you get a paper back from a student, you're like, wow, they sucked at this. This is just terrible. You want to be able to know what to do next, right? It's not just that the students don't have the skill. You need to identify what that misconception or what the gap is so that you can address that skill for them. So assessments that are revealing of student thinking are a little bit better than assessments that just kind of they just tell you like where are they at on a curve. Okay, so if you've done all of the above, you've got something that's like a hierarchy of goals with attached learning activities and with assessments that are attached to the goals as well. Now what you want to do is just take a break. Just set this aside for a few days, come back to it and take a look at it. And then you can go through and kind of do ask yourself a couple more questions on a second pass. So one of the questions you should ask yourself is, well, okay, how much time are these activities going to take? It's almost always the case that things are going to take longer than you think, especially when you're running a course for the first time. You also want to think about how much exposure or practice are students getting at these skills. Sometimes it's easy to think, it's like, well, I teach them, I spent one day on this and I taught them this skill and okay, now they know it and they solve some good problems. They did well on this test, or they did well on this in-class activity that I had them do. And so now they know it. But usually you need a lot more exposure and a lot more practice than just once or twice for students to kind of have that long-term knowledge or those long-term skills. Okay. And kind of the last thing you want to do is kind of go over and just check once again whether you need all these learning goals and which ones are maybe less important or more important, which ones are really focused on what students need. And after that, the only thing to do is to actually try to implement this in practice. So you learn a little bit from this design process, but you learn a whole lot from trying to do this. And so after you run this first course, you'll have a lot more information about kind of what you did wrong or ways you could improve the course in the future, especially if you're taking some notes as you go about like, how are things going this week? How did this week go? How did this particular session go, etc. Thank you for listening if you've made it this far. And if you like this video, if you found it helpful at all, click the like button. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.